We live in a crazy world. The world has changed the meaning of good and has labeled good into evil and evil into good. The world is more concerned about climate change than it is about personal conduct and personal responsibility, and will cover up all crimes of people as long as they have the correct agenda. As long as they are PC and they love the trees and the salamanders, and as long as good people are considered to be bad and bad people are labeled as good, they're fine. One of the most outrageous claims of the 20th and 21st century is that deviant behavior, that which was considered deviant by everyone, just about everyone, 30, 40, 50 years ago, is not only perfectly normal, but actually is hereditary and is genetic. And I've had this argument even with Orthodox rabbis, even with Hasidic rabbis. And the reason I've had this argument is that A, there is no real way of proving that it's genetic. I'll explain to you why in a second. And B, if we are religious Jews, and if we believe that the Torah is true, and the Torah was written by God, the Torah in the book of Leviticus calls homosexuality an abomination. Now, it would be a very, very cruel God to have created man to have to be homosexual and then call this an abomination. What God might have done is God gave us the plumbing that makes us desirous of having sexual relations. And we might want to have illicit sexual relations. But that doesn't mean we have to, and it is imperative upon us that we must have illicit sexual relations. If there's another man's wife in the room, and she's there, and she's very attractive, that doesn't give me the right or the license to have relations with somebody else's wife, despite the fact that I may be attracted to her. I still have the choice as to whether or not I'm going to go ahead and do what I'm going to do, if I have the power to do so, if she's willing, or even if I have the strength to force myself. But it is prohibited. It's prohibited. Everybody understands that. Just as it's prohibited by the Torah to have relations with another man's wife, despite the fact that you may be attracted to each other, despite the fact that you've been sexually depraved for a long time. Nonetheless, the Torah tells you you have to control yourself, and if you don't control yourself, there's going to be a stiff punishment. The same thing is true with homosexuality. Even if you have a sexual desire to have relations with someone of the same gender, the Torah says, don't do it. You're not allowed to do it. But even more than that, to say that this is something that people have no choice in, because their sexual preference is written in their DNA, that's garbage. There just was a study where the researchers have said, have openly admitted, that there is no way of proving this particular idea. There is nothing that they can point to in the genetic makeup of the person that will force a person to be homosexual, a male, and lesbian, a woman, or to demand from the male that you change genders, gender confusion. There's nothing in the DNA that has that. Psychologically, there may be causes for that. There may be people who are have certain weaknesses or certain characteristics which allow them to be suggestive of that, or suggestive or being attracted to that kind of behavior. But there's nothing in the human genomes that forces a person to be one way or another. On the contrary, we are programmed to be attracted to the female. And the reason for that is because God wanted men and women to have children. The fact that a lot of it happens through attacks and so on and so forth, that's evil, but the natural result of sexual relations is the ability to have a child. That child is, generally speaking, good and a blessing. There are many times when the unwanted pregnancy resulted in incredible gifts to mankind or to other people. They tell a story of a Jewish woman who was looking to get an abortion in Israel. And she came to a grocery store. In that grocery store, there might have been a seat that was given to from a holy man, and people would sit in it and they would find comfort and find blessing in that seat. At any rate, this woman related to the woman who owned the grocery store how she was pregnant. It was an unwanted pregnancy. There was no husband, and she wanted to abort. She suggested you go speak to the great Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who told her that it would be a better blessing for the world for her to have the child. 21 years later, the child she had saved the life of the woman who was the owner of that grocery store. The boy, who would have been an unwanted boy, grew up to be a fine, upstanding person and a fine military hero, and saved the life of another soldier who was the son of the mother of the woman who told this lady not to abort. There's no such thing as an unwanted child, and there's no such thing as an unnecessary child if the child is raised properly. Most importantly, there's no such thing as inherited deviance as a natural trait. If the Torah says it's deviant, then it's deviant. And nothing we can say makes it kosher. The same thing is true for all other aspects of life. God does not tell us that we have to take drugs. And there's no such thing that a person who takes drugs must take drugs. Rather, there are people of addictive personalities. I have an addictive personality. I love listening to news. And I love sports. And I love speaking to people. I can be addicted to that and listen to that for a whole day. But that doesn't mean that I can't turn that off. It doesn't mean I can't turn the radio off or I have to turn the radio on. Or if I had a television, or if I was watching television, to turn the television on and off. The point is, there is nothing in this world that forces you to do that which is for what God wants or not what God wants. And no amount of tree hugging absolves a person from making the wrong choices. Most of the time, the reason for sexual dysfunction in terms of sexual partners comes from environment. There's a lot more of homosexual behavior and attraction in a jail or in the army or in a seminary where there are only male students. And that's a fact. And when you have a domineering woman or domineering male, that could set the psyche of the person against male or female, depending upon the roles that they play in your life. Most important factor is we have to follow what God wants. And if you got a problem talk to God. And believe me, God does listen.